Parshas Vayeishev, Tavshin Gimel. Also, almost another couple of days we'll be at the Yontiv of Chanukah. As hard as it is to believe, we always say we were just talking about Sukkos. Chanukah is right here, and you know what happens after Chanukah. It's Purim's right around the corner. So there's a word from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says on the pasuk of Toras Hashem Tamima, Nesivos Nefesh in Tehillim. Baal Shem Tov says a word on the words of Toras Hashem Tamima. The word is that the Torah always remains complete. What does that mean? That many times, after all the drushes and all the learning and all the trying to understand something in the Torah, the Baal Shem Tov says, Toras Hashem Tamima. The Torah remains so complete, in other words, to teach us that we're hardly able to even scratch the surface to try to understand something in the Torah. That's the word of the Baal Shem Tov. And it is extremely apropos for this week's Parsha. Parshas Vayeishev, the things that go on in Parshas Vayeishev with Yaakov Avinu and Yosef and selling to Mitzrayim and all the things that go on, many, many different things in this week's Parsha. Toras Hashem Tamima, as much as we try to darshan and as much as we try to understand the soidus in the Torah, it remains that way. That it's very, very difficult to understand. So bearing that in mind, we'll ask a few questions at the beginning of the Parsha, and we'll see if somehow we're able to maybe scratch the surface and try to come up with some sort of explanation for what's going on here in the Parsha. The first question the Nesivos Shalom asks is, how did the Shvatim were doima to Malachim, the Shvatim were on such a high madrega, how did the Shvatim come to such a, quote, if we could say it, Maisa Achzorius, of taking their own brother and selling their own brother as a slave? How is that possible? How, we try to fathom the Shvatim, we can't even understand how high the madreg of the Shvatim was, and how do we understand that they took their own brother and they sold him off as a slave? And not only that, it seems from the Midrashim that the Shechina was maskim to them. They were mitzdaref the Shechina for a bezdin. They were mitzdaref the Shechina in order to decide to sell Yosef to Mitzrayim ultimately. And we see the Shechina. So how is that? How is it possible that the brothers were able to do such a thing? The Gemara says, Masechta Shabbos, Daf Yudam and Beis, La'olam al yishane Adam b'noi bein habonim. We just learned it in the Daf Yomi about 2 months ago, that a person should not differentiate or favor one of his children over his other children. That's the Gemara. So how is it, another question, in fact, in Nesivos Shalom, how is it that Yaakov Avinu did things for Yosef and loved Yosef more than the other Shvatim? He only made for Yosef only Kesainis Pasim. No one else got this Kesainis Pasim. I had a Gemara, so then you're going to answer me, Yeshiva Sheteret, there was no Gemara then. But Yaakov Avinu was Mekayim Kol Torah Kula, and then there was the concept was there that a person should not favor one child over the other child. Another Pella asked in the Nesivos Shalom, the Lashonis that I used, and we're so used to reading the Parsha, the Lashonis that I used at the beginning of the Parsha, Vayikanu Vayechav, Vayisneu Oisai, they were jealous. We're talking about the Shiftei Ka. How do we use a word Vayikanu that the Shvatim were jealous of Yosef, and Vayisneu Oisai? You know what hate is? How many people here could actually say to hate somebody? The Shvatim should hate Yosef. A lashon of Vayisneu Oisai. Again, we're talking about the Shiftei Ka. It can't be Pashup Pshat. The Mishnah says, right, if you talk about these Lashonos, the Mishnah says, Masechta Zavos Perek Daled, the Mishnah says, Hakina v'atayva v'akavim v'tzinas adam v'noilam. Kina, jealousy is terrible. And it looks like from over here, Vayikanu Vayechav. One of the three things that are moitzias adam and oilam, the Shvatim did just that. Vayikanu, they were jealous. And we go a little further, if you look a little further into it, how did the whole thing happen? Yosef said, Lashon Hara to Yaakov. The way we would understand Lashon Hara, Yosef said Lashon Hara to Yaakov. Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is a terrible, terrible Avera. Yoiva, so many Yisurim. Yosef said Lashon Hara to Yaakov. How is that possible? And one more question asked, which is a very interesting question. The Rashi says on the pasuk that it says that the brothers went away. What does it mean that the brothers? It says that when the brothers went, Rashi says that Nasu Vayomer Ish Nasu Mizeh. Rashi says Nasu Mina Achva. They say we're not. If we were considered a brother of Yosef till now, Nasu Mina Achva. They completely separated themselves. They were totally alienated from Yosef. Frek the Nesivos Shalom that Yosef knew that. Because once he told him, Nasu Mina Achva, so how was Yosef allowed to put himself in a sakana to go try to find his brothers now? Yosef knew that his brothers were not behaving to him like a brother anymore, and they wanted to kill him. And Yosef still went. How was Yosef allowed to go? This is a Grad Akasha that the Or Chaim HaKadosh asks also on this. How was Yosef allowed to continue on and go find his brothers if he was putting himself in a sakana? The Gemara Masechta Brachos Daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph says, Chayiv Adam levorech al hara k'shem shemevorech al hatoiva. Everybody knows this Gemara, that a person is mechuyev to be mevorech as Hashem on hara the same way you're mevorech on a toiva. Yaakov Avinu, they tried to be misnach, they tried to give nichum avelim to Yaakov Avinu, and the pasuk says vayima'en lehisnachen. Yaakov Avinu refused. Why did Yaakov Avinu refuse? The Gemara says that you're supposed to be mevorech l'shem, the same. Ra and toiva are supposed to be equal. You're supposed to accept. You're supposed to say, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. And Yaakov Avinu, we see again, it's a pella. So from every angle, the parsha is very, very difficult to understand at the beginning. We need to find some way to help us understand a mahalach. So Nesivos Shalom says a beautiful mahalach and how to understand this entire episode that we have here at the beginning of Parshas Vayeishev. It says that the Avos HaKadoshim were on such a high madrega. He goes through different madregas that people become when they do the Ratzon Hashem. He says the Avos were on such a high madrega that the amount that they did the Ratzon Hashem caused them to lose their Bechira. The Yaakov Avinu, Zok the Nesivos Shalom, had no Bechira. And the Evarim of the Avos did the Ratzon Hashem whether they liked it or not. Whether they wanted to do it or not. No, the tzaddikim that are metayr themselves so much, they become so directly connected to the Shechina that it's only possible for them to do the Ratzon Hashem. They can't do anything else. He brings a raya. He says the pasuk says by the Akedah that Avraham Avinu put Yitzchak on the Akedah, and the pasuk says Vayishlach es yodai. You ever see someone talk his hand, send their hand to go do something? Why does the pasuk have to say Vayishlach es yodai? Avraham Avinu had to send his hand. Zok the Nesivos Shalom. The Ratzon Hashem, we know, of course, was that Yitzchak Avinu should not be slaughtered, should not be killed. But Avraham Avinu had a tzivui, go and shech your son on the Akedah. So in order for Avraham Avinu, as much as he wanted to do the Maisa to Yitzchak, he couldn't do it because the Ratzon Hashem was that Yitzchak should not get killed. But Avraham Avinu wanted to be Mekayim what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him. So Vayishlach es Yoda, he had to physically push and send his hand to do something which he thought was against the Ratzon Hashem. That's how the Evarim, that's how a person works when they're metayr themselves. They're that close to the Shechina, and that's what the Avos were. Zok the Nesivos Shalom. With this explanation, we can answer all our questions. Once HaKadosh Baruch Hu had told Avraham Avinu in the parsha a few weeks ago that your future generations are going to have to go down to Mitzrayim. So there were two ways that they could have gone down to Mitzrayim. They could have gone down to Mitzrayim in chains as slaves, Zok the Medrash, or the sequence of events, things that were going to happen in the later generations had to lead up to the way somehow Klal Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael, the Shvatim had to end up in Mitzrayim. So Zok the Nesivos Shalom, that the Shvatim had no choice. They don't want to hate Yosef. They don't want to have sinah, but they had no choice They lost their Bechira. HaKadosh Baruch Hu caused the sequence of events that it had to work out. The whole thing had to work out like this, and therefore they were jealous. And therefore Yaakov sent Yosef to find his brothers, and Yosef should not have gone. But Yosef had to go. He didn't have the Bechira. Everything tells us they knew the halacha, they knew everything that they were supposed to do, but they didn't have the Bechira. Their Bechira was totally taken away. Zok Nesivos Shalom, because otherwise they would have had to go down to Mitzrayim in Sharash Rishel Barzli. They would have had to go down in chain as slaves, and this is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. What was happening here is that all the Shvatim were on that madrig of Yaakov Avinu also. Their limbs were just going through the motions. They were just doing the Ratzon Hashem. They had to sell Yosef. And Yaakov could not accept Nechama for that reason, because in order for Yosef to survive in Mitzrayim, as we see later in the Parsha, Yosef had to see the Dukna Shalavid. He had to keep his father with him. And if Yaakov would have accepted the condolence, if Yaakov would have accepted Nechama, that would be like coming to terms with it. I'm cutting my ties with Yosef. And the Ratzon Hashem was that Yosef had to keep his connection to Yaakov Avinu. So the Evarim of Yaakov Avinu would not accept this Nechama. So let us just ask a question now. How does a person bring himself to this madriga that we said about the Avos, where he does the Ratzon Hashem, and automatically, it's not something that happens overnight. Overnight, you don't become that type of person that your Evarim automatically do the Ratzon Hashem. How do you get there? How does a person make that his natural inclination is to do the Ratzon Hashem? And be'emes, this is no different, and I'm saying this on my own. This was not saying Nesivos Shalom, but it's no different than anything else that you do in life. Anything that you want to, if a person wants to work out a midah, if a person wants to train himself to be a bigger person in Avodas Hashem, you have to train. And training means doing things over and over, and you're constantly thinking whether every ma'aseh that you do is in sync with the Ratzon Hashem. And the more you do it, the more you're sensitive to this, you'll understand your body will automatically only want to do things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. I heard a beautiful vart this week from a Blazer Apter in our Shiur, and he said a very, very unbelievable thing. What does it mean to be sensitive to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants? He says it's a phenomenon. If you look around, it's a phenomenon, and it's this way by almost everybody. He says, what happens? You see a Yid in the street, and he's being Machal Shabbos. What's our first reaction when you see a Yid that's being Machal Shabbos? Most of the time we'll say, "Oy, Nebuch, he's being Machal Shabbos." Mistama, most probably, he's a Tinek Shenishba. Most probably, he doesn't know, he was born. Right away, we answer up for him everything. We say, "Nah, Nebuch, what can we do? He's a Tinek Shenishba, he's Nebuch." But you know what? We come to terms with it very quickly. Okay, Mistama, he didn't know anything about Shabbos, and we move on. He says, what happens if you're in the grocery store? And a guy walks into the grocery store, takes his groceries, and cuts right in front of the line. Behemagasa. What an animal. What no midas this guy is. Nothing. We'll never say over there, listen, leave him alone. He probably doesn't know. Probably no one ever trained him. He doesn't have midas. Let him get in the front of the line. What's the difference? In one case, by someone cutting in front of you in the grocery store, it's you. It's your covet. It bothers you. You're not willing. You stand up for your rights. You're not willing to say, Mistama, it's a mistake. He wasn't brought up right. We don't look at that. But when it comes to the covet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a guy's being Machal Shabbos, right there, he's being Oiver and Isser. We always say, listen, he wasn't brought up that way because it's only the covet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have to fight that. If you want to be a person that trains yourself and you're in sync to always do like the others, where you're automatically going to do the Ratzon Hashem, you have to be sensitive to what is the Ratzon Hashem. You have to go against the tide of only holding up our own kavod, and you have to keep on practicing. You have to keep on going over, doing the mitzvahs, and understanding, have the sensitivity to understand when something is wrong, when someone is not doing something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. And I was thinking, this is Mistama, also Pshat in what was going on in the Nes of Chanukah, in the time of Chanukah, in the Yevonim. We all know that the Yevonim did not want to kill the Yidden. The Yevonim were not out like in Al Anisim on Purim. We say Lahashnid, Laharoy. We don't say any of that. We're going to start saying Al Anisim, Mirtz Shem, Motzei Shabbos. We're not going to say anything about Lahashmid, Laharoy. Bikesh, all they wanted was to take away the mitzvahs of the Yidden. The Yevonim took away certain mitzvahs. What pshat? Because mitzvahs, when a person does mitzvahs over and over, that's what brings you close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's like your warm-up. You know, if you want to be a good foul shooter, right? The guy, no matter how good of a foul shooter you are in basketball, the guy will stand on the foul line and shoot 100 foul shots a day. Why? Because practice makes perfect. You do. If a person does mitzvahs over and over and over, he becomes closer to the Shekhinah. He becomes closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what the Yevonim wanted. They knew what they were doing. They may have not wanted to kill Klal Yisrael physically, but spiritually they knew if they would stop them from doing mitzvahs, they take you out of practice. Then you don't become that type of person where you're in sync with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Your Eivorim automatically gravitate and go to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. And that's the connection, we could say that's a connection between Chanukah and what we're going to learn from Chanukah about Taka doing those mitzvahs that the Yevonim wanted us to stop. The connection to this week's Parsha of learning how to fight the, quote, Yevonim of today's generation, learning how to do it from what we see in this week's Parsha, from Yaakov Avinu, from the Shvatim, where they were so used to and so in tune with doing the Ratzon Hashem that automatically, they didn't have to think about it, that even if they wanted to do something otherwise, automatically they did the Ratzon Hashem. Let's hope we learned this lesson, and we should taka Chanukah. Remember we said last year, Chanukah is 8 days. You have 8 days to grow. 8 days, Chanukah, aside from all the commercial side of Chanukah and all the wonderful presents that everybody gets and all the gelt that hopefully everybody gets also, right? That's like the main thing on Chanukah we know. There's 8 days of Chanukah, 8 days of celebration and donuts and all the other wonderful things. Free donuts, thousands and thousands of free donuts will be raining down on this town in just a couple of days. We have to remember the ikar of Chanukah, what it's all about. It's about growing in Ruchnius. They have 8 days to do it. If you blow Chanukah, you means you missed 8 days. We have 8 days to try to think about it and try to become the type of person that is always trying to do the Ratzon Hashem.